Hey, game changers. Listen, thanks for joining me. I want to dig into a topic that I am confident you can very quickly lay over top of your life, personally, professionally, in all kinds of different moments in your life. And it will allow you to show up in that moment a little bit better. It will allow you to leave a mark that you really do want to leave. It's a question that I think can change everything inside of all of these different moments in our life, which in turn ladder up to our legacy, right? Ladder up to who we're becoming, ladder up to the reputation and the relationships that we have in our lives. So here it is. It's a question that whether you're finding yourself in a moment, here's some situations, and I want to frame this up first, just in service of getting your head and heart where I think you need to go as you consider this question. A question that I truly believe can change everything in our lives. It's something that I've leaned into a lot, all the time, probably every day, several times throughout the day. So the question is, what do I want most? It's a question that we can ask ourselves. What do I want most? It's a question that you can ask yourself when you're upset. Maybe when you're inside of a difficult conversation in your life, at home or at work. Maybe when you're exhausted or when you're overwhelmed, or maybe when you're facing a challenge in your life. Not a problem, by the way. Like, I do not use that word. I don't think there are such things. I think there's challenges 100%. But inside of many of them can become opportunities. It's a question, what do I want most, that you can ask yourself when maybe you're needing clarity. It's a question that you can ask yourself, what do I want most, when maybe you're finding yourself being negative inside of a situation. It's, what do I want most when maybe you're afraid. Maybe you're afraid, you are afraid inside of a moment in your life. What do I want most? So I want you to consider all of those scenarios, and trust me, there are thousands more, right? But think about, what do I want most? And then think about moments in your life facing a challenge. You want clarity. Maybe you're being negative. Maybe you're inside of a difficult conversation. And when we lay that over top, what do I want most? It recenters us to show up, to speak in a way that I think drives for, and I have found personally, and I know with others that I've taught this to, I have found that it changes the outcome in a positive way. And so, what do I want most? So think about a moment in your life, maybe where or have found yourself, or maybe you're in it right now, where you're feeling a little, afraid, a little scared, a little anxious about something that's happening. And, I love stories, right? So I'm going to hit you with a story. And look, as you can imagine, at 53 years old, there's thousands of moments when I have felt afraid. I think, though, often the ones that, when I think about that really come to the surface for me are any time that the people that I love and care about so much are inside of a challenge, a health issue, whatever it might be. So what came up for me when I thought about this, for me, a moment when I was afraid, and a moment when I said, what do I want most? What do I want most? So I'm sitting in the stands, my daughter, one of our twins, outside shooting guard, and it is deep into the season, her junior year, and she steps back. There's about, 11, 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter of a game that then would continue them toward a state championship run, and she was a starting outside shooting guard, and so, she steps back, and I'm across the floor from her. I'm sitting with my husband, lots of other parents there supporting their kids. And all of a sudden, she just steps back. She has the ball in her hand. She steps back, and then she just drops, just falls. And I think most people thought, man, she twisted her ankles. She stumbled on something. She misstepped, whatever it was. But it was like she just dropped. And the way she dropped felt different to me, odd to me. And then she couldn't get back up. And that's when the refs and everybody were like, whoa. And they called a timeout and sort of assess the situation. And I remember, though, sitting there in that moment. She's a junior in high school, right? She's a strong girl, but it felt different to me. It looked different to me. And her little face that I love deeply looked different to me. And I looked at her, and I looked at my husband, and then he looked at me. He goes, no, don't do it. Don't do it, right? Because I am definitely not down for the parent, right, that's out there, candidly, in most circumstances on the court. But I looked and I thought, man, and I knew that something wasn't good. And so he, no, I don't know. And I remember thinking very quickly, what do I want most? What do I want most? And what came up for me was, she's really scared. And what I want most is for her to know that I'm there when they get her back to the training room, when they get her off the court and to the side, right? Like, I want her to be able to look at me and know, hey, girl, we got this. You got this. And so I kind of followed my gut. I jumped up thinking about, what do I want most? I jumped up, I ran sort of outside and around, and then I met her in the training room, and I could see she was looking at me and had been in a good bit of pain. But I sort of looked at her, and then the trainer, who I knew a bit, looked at me, and I had my hand on her back, and I said, hey, sweetie, I said, we're good. We're going to be all right, man. And I looked at the trainer, and I said, what do we got? And he had her roll over on her stomach, and he said, hey, roll over on your stomach if you would. And I sort of had my hand, I was touching her, and he looked at me, and he kind of mouthed, he goes, it's a torn Achilles. It's a torn Achilles for sure. He goes, and then he said to me out loud, feel this. And I could feel the back of the top of her ankle, where the Achilles normally is there as a structured tendon. And it literally went like tendon, nothing, for like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and then back to the top of it. But it had sort of curled up, right? And he sort of, it was so evident. It was just completely severed. And I share that story only because it was a moment when I was super afraid, because she was afraid. And she is, and my girls, my family are A1, obviously, as many of you know, and as for you, I'm sure. And so what do I want most? I want her to be able to look up and know, hey, girl, we got this, and I'm here, and I love you, and just to touch her. And look, I get it, right? Like, it's not like she was in a massive car accident, or, this is a real world, first world, if you will, situation. But I share that only because I know there are so many parents out there with kids in sports, or so many parents out there who find ourselves in moments all the time. And again, it can be moments at work where we aren't sure if we should say something in a boardroom because we're a little bit afraid. It can be a moment when we find ourselves feeling vulnerable or afraid in a myriad of circumstances. And what I would encourage you to consider in those moments, like I did with my daughter, in that particular little moment, I thought, what do I want most? And then consider, what that is, and then act. And, just to round it out, right? She was a junior. They lost the game after that situation. She had, the entire off season, obviously, to rehab, and she did. And she came back in 6 months, she was out on the court going hard, and helped lead her team to a state championship, which was unbelievable because women's basketball at her school had not ever done that before. So it was really pretty cool. But I share that only just to sort of round out that story. So you get so often, right? It's like, well, what happened? How did it end? Right. And she spent 6 months rehabbing, doing hard, doing all the hard things that happen when you're inside of any kind of an injury in a rehab. But again, the point of the story is simply to say, what do you want most? What do I want? And then consider what the next right step is for you inside of that situation. And so I'll give you one other example, right? A moment when maybe you have failed, a moment where I have failed, a moment, we don't have enough time on this podcast for me to rattle all those off, but we all have moments where maybe we failed. And again, right, I ask you to consider this question under the lens of all these moments. We're upset, we're exhausted, we're overwhelmed, we're inside of a tough conversation, we need clarity, we're being negative, we're afraid, we have failed, and we need to step back in and recover. So I'll tell you another story, a professional story where I found myself where I had failed. The outcome was not what I had planned and what I had wanted. And so I'll tell you a story again where I sort of leaned into this, what do I want most question. So I had recruited a baseball player for almost 2 years. Every day, all the time. I was not his agent, but when you're an agent, you still can, bring deals to guys or gals that you're trying to sign. And if they say yes, they say yes. And when I was early in my career, sometimes, right, I would add value. I always say, act like you have the business before you have the business, right? Behave in a way that sends a message to the people that you want to work with, that the relationship matters. It matters so much, in fact, that I'm gonna give you a little hot second taste of what this will look like, right? And start bringing them some deals. So I had done that with this particular player that I really wanted to sign and represent. He was going to be stepping into free agency in a year and a half or so. When I started recruiting him, I brought him camps, I brought him appearance deals, endorsements. He was inside of an all-star game once and needed to get in and out, and we got a plane and we flew with him, and great time, of course, with he and his family, but also got him in and out. I mean, all kind dinners. I mean, you name it. His wife, got to know her, awesome. We build a really strong relationship and had added a ton of value to his world. And now we were sort of at this point where it was time to lock and load the contract, right? He was going to be a free agent. And so we're sitting at dinner and we go to dinner and it's like, dude, no brainer, right? Like, we've been pouring into you. We're in a good spot. Go to dinner. We have this private room. We're sitting back there. I had brought this great bottle of wine, dropped it at their house. They ended up bringing it to the dinner. So we're sitting at dinner in this private room and we're sort of talking. And I said, man, hadn't this been fun? Like, oh man. And I'm sort of referencing some of the stuff that we did, and we're connecting and sharing. And I've got the physical contracts because we needed him to execute them so that we could represent him inside a free agency that was starting soon. And so I said, man, like we I'm excited to lock and load. Kind of here's how we have been thinking about free agency, how to position you, the market, et cetera. And we'd had lots of conversations about this over the last however long period of time relative to just what I saw in the market. He was an outfielder for outfielders, all that kind of stuff. Long story short, he sort of looks down in that moment, and then he kind of looks back up at me and he looks down, and because he knows it's like, let's go, right? Like, it's time to get married. And I said, and he just looked up at me and he said, I just can't do it, Mom. I just can't. I can't leave the guy that I'm with. I mean, you're amazing. You've been great. Like, I just can't thank you enough, but I just can't leave him. He's like a dad. He's like an uncle. He's like a brother. He's like I know that you would deliver and have, and I know that you would be, all of those sort of things, but I just can't. I just can't do it. I can't fire this guy and come over to you. And that was candidly the way that worked, right? Unless you got a guy right out of high school or college, or a gal in general, you're signing them potentially from another agent or an agency break, whatever it might be. And boy, I remember in that moment, and again, I mean, I care about he and his wife a ton, and I still see him, we're still great friends, but it was like, I just can't do it. And so I share that only because, man, I failed, right? Like, lots of money, lots of time, lots of resources, lots of energy, a lot of stuff. And so I remember kind of getting home and thinking, wow, right? Like, what did I miss? And then considering, what do I want most out of this, right? Like, what do I want most out of this? And I remember pretty quickly thinking, I got to learn from this. I got to understand what I missed. How do you do and go and deliver and all that and miss what candidly, fundamentally was probably a pretty fundamental gap and a question that I could have asked much earlier, right? What do you love about the guy that you're with? And I would have heard the same thing I heard several $100,000 later and several months later, which is, man, he's like a dad, he's like a brother, he's like, I just can't, he's my guy, right? I would have known, like, there's no crack in the door, he's in good shape. Like, cool, there's 750 other guys in the big leagues, right? Like, knock yourself out, Molly. And I remember thinking, what do I want most? And I remember thinking, I want to learn from this. I want to understand what I missed. And that was when I realized, right, fundamentally, that was a moment that I had an opportunity to learn from, that I had failed, that what I wanted most was to learn from it so that I didn't do it again, so that I didn't make that kind of mistake again. I failed. I wanted most to learn from it. I share that only, again, as sort of a professional example, but an example in which, again, a moment where, man, what do I want most? So I would just encourage you to consider times in your life. Maybe there's some that you're inside of right now. Maybe there's some that they probably will happen tomorrow or the next day or this afternoon or later this morning, whenever you're listening to this podcast. And then just consider, what do I want most? I find this remarkably effective inside of difficult conversations or inside of any conversation. What do I want most? As a parent, it's a great question to ask yourself inside of moments. As a partner, as a spouse, with my husband, personally, professionally, it's an awesome, easy tactic, quick and easy tactic to lay over top of moments. So I hope this is helpful for you, and know that most importantly, This is the kind of question that we can ask ourselves in service of, by the way, not what you're going to get per se, but what and who you can then show up better for, that you can serve better to, for, so that you can maybe lead better inside of a moment. And I think that's a really important nugget, by the way, that I probably should have laid over top on the front end. But when I say, what do I want most? It's in service of showing up in a way that creates connection, adds value, all of those kinds of things that I know matter so much to all of us in our lives. So there you have it, laid over top. What do I want most? By the way, I think this is something that as a family, what do we want most? As a team, what do we want most? As a vertical inside of an organization, what do we want most? We can lay this inside of meetings and moments that can change the way we consider the circumstances and the situation in service of creating a better outcome. All right, until next time, have an incredible rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for checking this out. And most importantly, don't hesitate to hit me up with topics, ideas, anything that I can speak to from my lens that can serve you in any way. Man, I love the ideas that roll in. They're awesome. So thank you so much. You can send those right to hello@mollyfletcher.com. And again, as always, man, if you get a minute, please rate and review the podcast. Man, it helps me a lot. And like I've said before, it gets my marketing team off my booty. Until next time, I'll see you soon.